The MC read the name off the card and let it hang. Kate Sheridan, Sheridan Capital Group, paired with Adam Prescott, independent contractor. Laughter moved through the ballroom. 300 executives in black tie, champagne in hand, and the phrase independent contractor sitting in the air like a misprint no one had caught. Greg Aldrich lifted his glass from a corner table. Didn't drink. Just watched. Kate's fingers tightened around her wine glass. She found the man walking toward her. Work boots on marble. Clean flannel. Hands that had held tools longer than pens. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Didn't introduce himself. Didn't smile. Didn't look away. He met her eyes and held there, steady. The room was still laughing. Kate waited for the flinch. The stammer. The apology for being out of place. None of it came. Something in his stillness made her set down her glass. What happens when the man everyone underestimated turns out to be the one person she can't afford to ignore? Stay with this one. The story earns every minute. Adam's mornings started the same way every day. 5:45. Coffee on the counter before the sun cleared the roofline. Sam's backpack by the door, lunch packed the night before. By 6:15, the two of them were in the truck, a dented Ford with 200,000 miles on the odometer. Sam sat in the passenger seat with a popsicle stick bridge balanced on his knees, testing the joints with his thumb. He was 10. Quiet the way some kids are quiet. Not shy, just watching. He'd been like that since he was 6, the year his mother died. Adam dropped him at Millvale Elementary every morning at 7, waited until Sam's backpack disappeared through the front doors, then drove to whatever job site had him booked for the week. Kitchens, bathrooms, decks. He did clean work, careful work, the kind that showed only when you looked closely and disappeared when you didn't. His clients trusted him. Some waited months for his schedule to open. None of them knew what he used to do. 5 years earlier, Adam Prescott had been a senior structural engineer at Hollister & Crane, one of the top engineering firms in western Pennsylvania. Licensed PE, lead assessor on commercial developments across the tri-state area. He'd been assigned to evaluate the foundation design for Grandview Tower, a 14-story mixed-use building on the south side developed by Sheridan Capital Group. The soil report came back unstable. Adam wrote a 47-page assessment recommending a complete redesign of the foundation system, a fix that would have added 8 months and more than $4 million to the budget. Hollister's leadership told him to approve the existing design. Adam refused. 2 weeks later, his position was eliminated. His references were blocked. His name was quietly removed from every project file he'd ever touched. No firm in the Pittsburgh market would return his calls. The network that ran the engineering community in that city was small, and Hollister sat at the center of it. Adam didn't fight it. He didn't have the resources, and the fight would have consumed years he didn't have to spare. When his wife Laura died a year later, in a car accident on Route 28 during a rainstorm, Adam stopped looking for engineering work entirely. He picked up his father's tools, leased a workshop space in Lawrenceville, and started taking carpentry jobs. He was good at it. He'd always been good with his hands. But it was a different life, and every morning at the workbench, the precision in his hands came from somewhere the wood didn't require. Kate Sheridan's world operated on a different axis. The 40th floor of a glass tower in the Strip District. 3 assistants. A calendar blocked in 15-minute segments from 6 in the morning until 9 at night. She'd taken over Sheridan Capital at 26, after her father's mismanagement left the company $14 million in debt. She cut divisions, renegotiated every contract, and executed 3 hostile takeovers in 5 years that made the press call her the most ruthless developer under 40 in the Northeast. She didn't correct them. What no profile mentioned was that every move had been a survival play. The ruthlessness wasn't temperament. It was math. By 33, Sheridan Capital was valued at more than $2 billion. Kate owned the controlling stake. No partner. No close friends outside the office. No life that didn't route through the company. The Greater Pittsburgh Business Alliance ran its partnership program every year. 8 weeks. Executives paired with community members for a joint development project. It was supposed to build bridges. Mostly it built photo opportunities. Greg Aldrich sat on the Alliance's board. He also ran Aldrich Partners, a mid-sized development firm that had been losing bids to Sheridan Capital for 3 straight years. And 5 years before that, he'd sat on the advisory board at Hollister & Crane. He'd been the loudest voice pushing to override Adams' report, because construction delays on Grandview Tower would have triggered a penalty clause on his own adjacent project. When the Alliance asked board members for pairing suggestions, Greg submitted one. Kate Sheridan with Adam Prescott, the ruthless billionaire and the single dad carpenter. He thought it would be funny. He thought it would embarrass her. And most importantly, he thought neither of them would ever connect the dots between a buried report, a ruined career, and the building that was quietly beginning to crack. The community center in Lawrenceville had been closed for 2 years. Water damage in the basement, a cracked facade, and a heating system that hadn't worked since the previous winter. The Alliance assigned it to Kate and Adam as their partnership project, evaluate the structure, propose a renovation scope, present it for city funding. Kate arrived first. Black SUV, heels on cracked concrete, leather portfolio under her arm. She walked the perimeter of the building the way she walked through acquisition targets, measuring liabilities. Adam was already inside. He'd been there since 7. Kate found him in the main hall, standing with his hand flat against a crack that ran diagonally from the window frame to the baseboard. She stopped a few feet behind him. He didn't turn around. They walked the building together. Kate talked about cost projections, square footage, which line items the city council would prioritize in a funding application. Adam listened, nodded, said almost nothing. She was used to that. Most people went quiet around her. They reached the east corridor. Adam stopped again. This time he crouched near the base of the wall and ran his fingers along the mortar joint. Kate glanced down. A hairline crack, barely visible. She'd walked past 100 of those in buildings she owned. "That's cosmetic," she said. Adam didn't stand up. "It's not. That crack follows the mortar joint at 45 degrees. Differential settlement. The footer on the east side is failing." Kate didn't move. The words sat in the air, and they were wrong for the man who'd said them. That wasn't contractor language. That was structural engineering, textbook precise, delivered without hesitation, without thinking. Adam caught himself. He straightened up, shifted his weight, and his voice dropped back to something simpler. "Might want to note it for the scope." He moved on down the corridor without looking back. Kate stayed where she was for 3 full seconds. She looked at the crack, then at the man walking away from her. The rest of the walkthrough confirmed what the first moment suggested. In the basement, Adam identified HVAC routing that had been installed backward, supply and return lines swapped in a way that would starve the east wing of heat every winter. On the second floor, he found a load path that had been interrupted by a previous renovation. Someone had cut through a bearing wall to widen a doorway, and the header above it was undersized for the span it now carried. He pointed at the sagging lintel and told Kate the exact dimension of the replacement beam that would fix it. He didn't lecture. He didn't show off. He explained just enough to be useful, and he was right every time, with the kind of certainty that doesn't come from experience alone. It comes from training. In the parking lot afterward, Kate sat in her car and didn't start the engine. She typed Adam Prescott, structural engineer, Pittsburgh, into the search bar on her phone. Nothing came back. No license records. No project credits. No professional profile of any kind. His history had been cleaned out, not just absent but erased, the kind of absence that takes effort to create. She set the phone down on the passenger seat and looked at the building through the windshield. She didn't know who Adam Prescott was, but she knew what she'd heard in that hallway, and she knew it wasn't something a man picked up over the years. But that was just the beginning. What Kate uncovered next would change far more than her opinion of one carpenter. The second session was at the community center again, Tuesday morning, 8 o'clock. Adam was already there when Kate arrived, which was becoming a pattern. He'd brought drawings this time, rolled under his arm, secured with a rubber band. Not rough sketches on grid paper, hand-drafted renovation plans, precise to the quarter inch. Foundation reinforcement details, beam schedules, window header sizing with load calculations noted in pencil along the margins, the notation style tight and uniform, the kind of draftsmanship that took years of practice to develop. Kate unrolled them on the folding table in the main hall and studied them without speaking. She traced a beam schedule with her finger, following the load path from the roof down through the columns to the footings. Every number checked, every dimension accounted for. She looked up. "Where did you study?" Adam folded his arms across his chest. "Picked things up over the years." The answer was flat. "Practiced." A door closed before she could reach the handle. Kate let it go, but she stopped treating him like an obligation after that morning. Something had shifted. She started asking follow-up questions about the plans. Real questions, technical ones, the kind she'd normally direct at a licensed engineer. Adam answered every one without hesitating. Greg Aldrich showed up at the community center that Thursday. He parked his Mercedes across 2 spaces in the gravel lot and walked in wearing a cashmere overcoat that didn't belong within 50 yards of a construction site. He shook Kate's hand, held it 1 beat too long, then turned to Adam, who was measuring a door frame with a steel tape along the east corridor. Greg smiled the way a man smiles when he knows something the room doesn't. "How's our carpenter doing with the big leagues?" He said it loud enough for Kate to hear, loud enough for the words to carry the full length of the hallway. Adam didn't look up. He read the measurement off the tape, marked it on his notepad in pencil, and moved to the next frame without breaking rhythm. Greg waited. He wanted a flinch, a hesitation, a flicker of something he could file away and use later. He got nothing. Adam just kept measuring. Kate watched both of them from the doorway at the end of the corridor. She watched the non-reaction from Adam, complete, deliberate, the stillness of a man who decided years ago that certain people didn't deserve the energy of a response. And she watched the tone from Greg, not the kind of condescension people use on strangers, but something targeted, something with a history behind it. She filed it. These 2 men knew each other, and neither of them was saying how. That same week, a maintenance report crossed Kate's desk at Sheridan Capital. Grandview Tower, 6th floor, recurring cracks in the drywall along the east-facing units. The building's facilities manager attributed it to normal settling, typical for a structure of that age and soil profile. Kate initialed the report, slid it to the bottom of her stack, and moved on. It didn't register as anything more than routine. Not yet. Kate went to Adam's workshop on a Saturday morning. She told herself it was to review the renovation plans before the mid-program deadline. The workshop was in a converted garage on Butler Street, narrow, low-ceilinged, and immaculate. Every tool hung in its place on a pegboard arranged by size and function. Lumber was stacked against the far wall, sorted by species and grain direction. The workbench ran the full length of the room, scarred from years of use, but leveled to within a fraction of an inch. At the far end, lined up in a neat row, sat 3 popsicle stick bridge models, each one slightly more refined than the last. Sam's. Kate didn't ask about them. Adam spread the community center plans across the bench. Material lists, structural reinforcement sequences, load redistribution diagrams for the east wall, a complete phasing schedule that accounted for weather, hearing times, and inspector availability. The scope of work was detailed enough to submit as a professional engineering proposal. Kate turned the pages slowly, running her eyes over every annotation. "You did all this in a week?" Adam wiped sawdust off his hands with a rag. Didn't have much else to do evenings. She turned back to the plans. On the wall behind the bench, near the pegboard, hung a framed photograph. A younger Adam in a hard hat and high-visibility vest, standing on a steel deck with a half-finished skyline behind him. The vest had a logo stitched on the left chest. Hollister and Crane. Kate saw it. She didn't say a word, but her eyes stayed on it for 2 full seconds before she turned back to the drawings. After that Saturday, the dynamic between them shifted. Kate stopped asking Adam to explain his reasoning and started asking for his opinion. She brought hypothetical development questions, site layout problems, budget allocation decisions, structural risk scenarios. None of them connected to the community center, all of them drawn from real projects at Sheridan Capital. She never named the projects. Adam didn't ask. He just answered, sharp and precise, every time. Structural logic, cost sequencing, load path risk assessment. The kind of thinking she paid consulting firms 6 figures to deliver, offered across a workbench covered in sawdust by a man who fixed cabinets for a living. Kate realized, somewhere during that morning, that she had never been mentoring Adam Prescott. He'd been holding back since the first day, and she still didn't know why. The William Penn Hotel ballroom looked different at half capacity. The mid-program reception was smaller than the gala, business casual, round tables instead of banquet seating, the same chandeliers casting a softer light over a thinner crowd. Every pairing was expected to present a progress update on their community project. Greg Aldrich had arranged the presentation schedule. Adam and Kate were listed last. Kate watched from the back of the room as the other pairs took their turns. Slide decks, talking points, polished summaries that sounded good and said little. When their slot came, Adam stood, walked to the front of the room without notes, without slides, without a laptop, and laid out the community center renovation plan from memory. He started with the foundation, walked through the load-bearing deficiencies, the differential settlement pattern, the reinforcement sequence he'd designed to arrest it. Then the mechanical systems, HVAC rerouting, plumbing relocation, electrical panel upgrades. Then the material timeline, phased across 14 weeks to account for concrete curing, inspection windows, and seasonal constraints. He spoke for 12 minutes without stopping. Every number, every dimension, every phasing detail pulled from the same mind that had drafted the plans by hand in a garage on Butler Street. The room went quiet when he finished. Not the polite quiet of people preparing to applaud. The real quiet, the kind that happens when a room full of professionals recognizes one of their own. 3 executives raised their hands with follow-up questions. Adam answered all of them without reaching for a single piece of paper. Kate stood near the doorway with her arms folded. She didn't applaud. She watched Adam walk back to his seat, unhurried, the same way he walked through a job site, like the room belonged to whoever was doing the work, and right now that was him. Greg Aldrich sat at his table with his water glass untouched. His face had gone flat, and his hand rested on the tablecloth without moving. This was not what the pairing was supposed to produce. The carpenter was supposed to stumble. The billionaire was supposed to look foolish standing next to him. Neither thing had happened. After the presentations ended and the room began to empty, Greg caught Helen Briggs in the corridor outside the elevators. "The program is about mentorship," he said, adjusting his lapel. "Not showcasing handymen." Helen Briggs looked at him for a long moment. She was 58 years old, had been running the partnership program for 9 years, and had no patience left for men who confused embarrassment with principle. He just outpresented half the executives in that room, Greg. "If you have a concern about the program structure, put it in writing." Greg didn't put it in writing. That night, Kate was alone in her office on the 40th floor. The city lights spread out below the windows, and the facilities report from Grandview Tower sat at the top of her inbox for the second time in a month. Updated. Worse. Cracks on floors 4 through 8 now. Not just the drywall anymore. Hairline fractures had appeared in the concrete slab along the east load line on the 6th floor. Her head of facilities, a man who did not alarm easily, had flagged the report with a single word in the subject line: urgent. He recommended an independent structural assessment. Kate signed the authorization and set the report aside. Routine. Or so she told herself. Then she opened her laptop and typed Hollister Crane Grandview Tower Structural Assessment into Sheridan Capital's project archive. The search returned 2 results. The original engineering contract came first. Below it, the full project timeline, milestones, permits, foundation inspections, certificate of occupancy. She scrolled through 3 years of documentation. And then she stopped. The structural assessment had 2 entries. The first was dated 5 years ago, status marked withdrawn. The second was dated 3 weeks later, status marked final, signed by a different engineer. 2 entries where there should have been 1. The author name on the first entry had been scrubbed, replaced with a blank field. Kate leaned back in her chair. She didn't close the file. She didn't pull up the next item in her inbox. She stared at the gap between those 2 dates and let the question take shape on its own. The truth had been sitting in Kate's own archive for 5 years. She just hadn't had a reason to look. Kate pulled the full Grandview Tower project file the next morning. Every document, every revision, every internal memo Sheridan Capital had received during the construction phase. Deep in the folder structure, buried beneath 4 years of tenant files and maintenance logs, she found a preliminary structural assessment dated 5 years earlier. The author line read Adam Prescott, P.E., Hollister and Crane Engineering. The report was 47 pages. It flagged critical deficiencies in the foundation design, soil instability along the eastern load line, insufficient depth on 2 of the primary footers, a recommendation for complete redesign of the foundation system. Estimated cost, $4.2 million. Estimated delay, 8 months. The report had never been transmitted to Sheridan Capital. It had been killed internally at Hollister and Crane and replaced, 3 weeks later, by a clean assessment signed by a different engineer who approved the original design without a single change. Kate read the full report. Every calculation, every margin note written in Adam's precise hand. She cross-referenced it page by page against the current facility's reports sitting on her desk. The cracks on floors 4 through 8 followed the exact load line Adam had flagged 5 years ago. The settlement pattern matched his predictions within 2%. The footer depths he'd called insufficient were the same footers now sinking into unstable soil at a rate his report had projected to the decimal. 5 years ago, a man she hadn't known existed had looked at her building and told the truth about what would happen if the foundation wasn't fixed. And the truth had been pulled from the file, and the man had been pulled from his career, and the building had gone up anyway. Kate closed the report and opened the project's governance folder. She pulled the Hollister and Crane Advisory Board roster. 5 names. The third was Greg Aldrich, Aldrich Partners, Advisory Board member, appointed 6 years before the assessment, resigned 14 months after Adam's termination. She stared at the name. Then she closed the governance file and opened the alliance's internal records. She found the partnership program pairing submission form for the current year. Greg's name was on it. He had entered the pairing himself. Adam Prescott and Kate Sheridan. Not random. Not generated by the matching algorithm the alliance used for other pairings. Handpicked. He had put the woman whose building was cracking in the same room as the man who had tried to prevent it, believing neither of them would ever look closely enough to see the connection. Kate didn't leave her office that night until the cleaning crew came through at 11. She didn't make calls. She didn't send emails. She sat with the report open on her screen, the city lights flat and still below, and she thought about a man in work boots who'd sat down across from her at a gala and hadn't flinched. The next afternoon, Kate drove to the community center in Lawrenceville. She didn't call ahead. Adam was inside, replacing a section of damaged baseboard along the east wall, kneeling with a pry bar and a box of finished nails beside him. Kate stood in the doorway with the late afternoon light behind her and didn't step into the room. Adam saw her shadow first. He set down the pry bar, stood up slowly. Neither of them moved for a long moment. "You worked on Grandview Tower?" Kate said. Adam straightened the rest of the way. 5 years ago, you flagged the foundation. Yes. They fired you for it. Adam looked at her. The same look from the gala. The same steadiness, held without effort, like a bearing wall that didn't need reinforcement. He didn't answer the question, and he didn't need to. The answer was standing in front of her in work boots and a flannel shirt. 5 years and a whole career removed from the man who'd written that report. "The building is cracking," Kate said. Adam nodded once, slowly. "I know. I've driven past it. Seen the scaffolding going up. Why didn't you say anything? To me? When you found out who I was?" Adam set the pry bar on the windowsill. He stood for a moment, looking at the floor between them, then back at her. "It wasn't your fault," he said. "And telling you wouldn't have changed what happened to me." The light from the corridor windows cut a long stripe across the floor between them. Neither of them crossed it. Kate had an independent structural assessment ordered within 48 hours. She hired a firm out of Philadelphia. No connections to Hollister and Crane, no history with Sheridan Capital, no reason to shade the results. The assessment took 3 weeks. The team ran ground-penetrating radar on the foundation, pulled core samples from 3 of the primary footers, and measured settlement rates across every load-bearing column on the east side of the building. The findings confirmed everything Adam had written 5 years ago. The eastern footers were undersized for the soil conditions. Differential settlement had been progressing at a rate of 0.3 inches per year since construction. The cracks on floors 4 through 8 were structural, not cosmetic. Remediation would require partial excavation, underpinning of 3 primary footers, and reinforcement of the slab connections across 6 floors. Estimated cost, $6 to $8 million. If left unaddressed, the east section of Grandview Tower faced potential partial condemnation within 18 months. Kate read the assessment at her desk at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday night. She read it twice. The second time, she held Adam's original report beside it and compared them side by side. The same deficiencies, the same load lines, the same footers. 2 reports written 5 years apart by 2 different firms, and every critical finding aligned. The only difference was that the first report had been written in time to prevent the damage. She set both documents down, picked up her phone, and made 2 calls. The first was to her general counsel. The second was to Helen Briggs. The following week, she found Greg Aldrich at an alliance board meeting. She didn't raise it during the session. She sat through 2 hours of budget updates and committee reports without a word. When the meeting broke, she followed Greg into a side corridor near the service elevator. He was reaching for his overcoat when he heard her footsteps and turned. Kate stood 6 feet away. She didn't raise her voice. "You sat on Hollister's advisory board," she said. "You were in the room when Adam Prescott's report was discussed. You pushed to override it because the construction delay would have triggered a penalty clause on your own project. And then you sat on this board and paired me with him because you thought it would be funny." Greg's expression moved through 3 phases in 4 seconds. Surprise. Calculation. Control. He straightened the collar of his coat. "The building was approved by a licensed engineer," he said. "I had nothing to do with internal personnel decisions at Hollister. You had everything to do with the decisions that made those personnel decisions necessary." Greg adjusted his cufflinks. A practice gesture, something to do with his hands while his mind found the angle. "Kate, think carefully about what happens if this goes public. It's your building, your name on the deed, your liability on the balance sheet, not mine." Kate looked at him with the same expression she wore in boardrooms when she'd already decided to take a company apart and the other side hadn't realized it yet. "I'll take the liability," she said. "That's what I do." Greg held her gaze for another second, then turned and walked to the elevator without his overcoat. Kate watched the doors close. That night, Adam was in his workshop, sanding a cabinet door under the overhead lamp, when his phone rang. Kate's name on the screen. He set down the sandpaper and answered. She told him about the Philadelphia assessment. She read him the key findings, the footer dimensions, the settlement rate, the projected timeline for condemnation. The numbers matched his original report within 2%. Adam listened without interrupting. When she finished, the silence on the line lasted long enough for him to lean his weight against the bench and close his eyes. "I want you to consult on the remediation," Kate said. "I'm not licensed anymore. They pulled my references. I couldn't renew. We'll deal with that." Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then Adam said, "All right," and Kate hung up. Kate's legal team began the review on a Monday morning. The scope was narrow but deep. Adam's termination file from Hollister and Crane, the suppressed structural assessment, the replacement report signed by the substitute engineer, and the systematic reference blacklisting that had shut Adam out of every engineering firm in western Pennsylvania for 5 years. The documentation was more thorough than anyone expected. Hollister had been careful about appearances. The termination letter cited restructuring, not misconduct, but careless about internal records. Their email server still held every exchange from the period. Internal correspondence showed the foundation override had been discussed at the advisory board level before Adam's termination was finalized. One email, sent the day before his position was eliminated, referenced a recommendation from an external board member to resolve the personnel issue quickly and quietly. The sender, Hollister's managing partner, did not name the board member in the body of the message. The recipient's reply did. Greg Aldrich. A second chain of emails, dated 2 weeks after Adam's departure, showed Hollister's HR director circulating a list of firms that had inquired about Adam's references. Each inquiry had been answered with the same language. Eligible for rehire? No. Performance concerns noted. The language was generic enough to avoid a defamation claim, but specific enough to ensure that no firm would take the risk. Helen Briggs initiated the alliance's internal review that same week. The charge was straightforward. A board member had manipulated program pairings for personal and potentially legal reasons, in direct violation of the alliance's ethics charter. Greg tried to rally support from the remaining board members. He called 4 of them individually over 2 days, framing the situation as a misunderstanding, a personality conflict between Kate and himself. By the 3rd day, none of them returned his calls. They'd all read the structural assessment. A 14-story building facing partial condemnation because a report was buried at the advisory board level was not a political disagreement. It was a liability, and no one wanted their name next to it. Kate presented the full timeline to the Alliance board on a Thursday evening. She laid every document out in sequence. Adam's original assessment, the internal override at Hollister, the termination, the reference blacklisting, Greg's position on the advisory board during the relevant period, the pairing submission form with his signature at the bottom. She spoke for 20 minutes. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't editorialize. She let the paper do the work it had always been capable of doing if someone had looked. The board voted 6-1 to remove Greg Aldrich from the alliance. The single dissenting vote was his own. Hollister and Crane, facing potential liability for the suppressed assessment and the retaliatory termination, entered settlement discussions with Adams' legal team within 2 weeks. The terms included a full retraction of all negative references and a formal written acknowledgement that Adams' original structural report had been professionally sound and consistent with engineering standards. The state licensing board accepted the retraction and began processing Adams' license reinstatement. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette ran a story the following month. The headline didn't use the word ruthless. It called Kate Sheridan the CEO who ordered an independent structural audit on her own flagship building, knowing the results would cost her millions and expose a failure in her own construction pipeline. The article quoted Helen Briggs. It did not quote Greg Aldrich. But the story wasn't finished. Not for Adam, and not for Kate. Saturday morning, early November. The workshop was cold, and Adam had the space heater running near the bench, its orange coil glowing in the gray light that came through the single garage window. Sam sat on the stool beside him, holding a piece of balsa wood steady with both hands while Adam marked a cut line with a carpenter's pencil. They were building a scale model of the community center, the renovated version, with the new roof pitch and the reinforced east wall drawn to scale from Adam's own plans. Sam held the piece without fidgeting. He had his father's patience, the ability to stay still and pay attention to something small for as long as it needed. Adam made the cut, set the piece in place, and held it while Sam squeezed a thin line of glue along the joint. They didn't talk much while they worked. They didn't need to. The workshop had its own rhythm on Saturday mornings, the heater clicking, the pencil scratching, the faint smell of balsa and wood glue, and both of them knew how to move inside it without getting in each other's way. Kate arrived at 9:30. She'd called ahead. She carried a rolled tube of plans under one arm and 2 coffees from the place on Butler Street, the one with the green awning that Adam had mentioned once, weeks ago, in a conversation about nothing in particular. He opened the garage door for her. She stepped inside, handed him a coffee, and unrolled the plans across the bench. The city had approved the full renovation scope, every detail, the foundation reinforcement, the mechanical overhaul, the structural upgrades along the east wall. Full funding. No conditions. Adam read the approval letter with both hands flat on the paper, holding it the way a man holds something he's waited a long time to see confirmed in writing. They sat on the porch afterward. The November air was sharp, but the sun was out, low and warm along the roofline of the house across the street. Kate held her coffee with both hands and looked at the neighborhood. They talked about things that had nothing to do with buildings or boards or buried reports. How long Adam had been in the house. The restaurant on Penn Avenue that Kate admitted she'd driven past 100 times without stopping. A bakery on 44th Street that Adam said made the only decent rye bread left in the city. The conversation was quiet and unhurried, the kind that only happens between 2 people who have stopped trying to manage what the other one thinks of them. The screen door opened behind them. Sam stepped out with a popsicle stick bridge in both hands and walked over to Kate without hesitation. He held it out. She took it carefully, the way Adam handled a dovetail joint, with attention and no rush. She turned it over, studied the glue lines, the cross bracing, the way the trusses fit flush against the deck without a gap. She held it for a long time. "It's solid," she said quietly. Sam looked at his father, then back at Kate. It was the first time someone outside of his world had held something he'd made and understood, without being told, what he was trying to do. 8 months later, the community center on Butler Street opened its doors for the first time in 3 years. The renovation had taken 6 months of construction and 2 months of inspections. Adam led the structural work, his engineering license reinstated through the state board after Hollister's formal retraction cleared the last hold. He didn't go back to a firm. He kept the workshop on Butler Street, took the projects he chose, consulted on the ones that mattered. The Grandview Tower remediation was underway across town, a full engineering team executing the underpinning and slab reinforcement Adam had recommended 5 years earlier. His original report, the 47 pages that had been buried in a file cabinet at Hollister and Crane, was now the governing document for a $6.8 million structural rehabilitation. The same numbers, the same recommendations. The same load path analysis written by a man who'd been told it wasn't worth the delay. 5 years and 8 floors of cracks later, every word of it held. Greg Aldrich was removed from every board he'd sat on by the end of that year. Aldrich Partners lost 2 major contracts when the structural cover-up entered public record. The firm didn't collapse. It contracted. Greg still had his name on the door, but the calls came less often and the bids stopped winning. There was no dramatic reckoning. Just the slow, ordinary consequences of a decision made in a conference room 5 years ago, finally arriving. The partnership program held its closing ceremony in December at the same William Penn Hotel ballroom where the pairings had been announced. Helen Briggs stood at the podium and spoke without notes. She didn't tell Adam and Kate's story in detail. She said only that this year's program had proven something she'd always believed, that the right partnership could change more than either person expected, and that sometimes the most important work was simply putting 2 people in the same room and trusting what happened next. She didn't mention Greg's name. She didn't glance at his empty chair. Adam sat near the back of the room. Kate was 3 tables away. They hadn't arrived together. They didn't sit together. But twice during Helen's remarks, Kate looked across the ballroom, and both times Adam was already looking back. After the ceremony, they drove separately to the community center. It was evening, and Butler Street was quiet the way residential streets get quiet in December. The building was empty, but the lights were on for the first time, warm and steady through the new windows, spilling onto the sidewalk. Adam was already inside when Kate walked up the front steps. They went through it together, room by room. He showed her the reinforced headers, the east wall footings he'd redesigned from scratch, the load paths running from the roof trusses through the columns to the foundation, clean and continuous. He spoke quietly, not presenting, just pointing out what was there. Kate walked beside him with her hands in her coat pockets and listened. Not the way a CEO listens, evaluating, categorizing. She just listened to him talk about the building the way he talked about everything he'd built, with care and without asking for anything in return. Sam was outside when they came back through the front entrance, sitting on the new steps with his backpack between his knees and a half-finished popsicle stick model poking out of the top. Something new, bigger than the bridges. Kate sat down beside him. The step was cold. Adam stood in the doorway behind them, one hand on the frame, looking out at Butler Street in the dark. The streetlights came on one by one. "You built this, right?" Kate said. She wasn't looking at Sam. Adam leaned against the frame. "It was right to begin with," he said. "Just needed someone to see it." Sam zipped his backpack. Kate stayed where she was. Adam stepped out of the doorway and sat down on the other side of his son. The 3 of them on the front steps of a building that had been closed for 3 years and was open again, warm light falling across the sidewalk behind them. Nobody said anything for a while. The street was quiet, and there was nothing left to prove. Not everything worth building comes with a blueprint.